Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Cecilia Koger. I am the Director of Exhibitions and Public Programming. Before we begin, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement. Angels Gate Cultural Center is located in San Pedro in the Port of Los Angeles region of California. We recognize that we live and work on the traditional and sacred lands of the Tongva, Kizh, Ahachiman, Chumash, and many other indigenous groups who call these grounds home. We at Angels Gate Cultural Center honor and extend our gratitude to all the original peoples living in this region. Just so everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded. You do have the option to turn on closed captionings. At the bottom of your screen, the bottom right hand, you'll see a little button that says closed captioning. You can enable that if you need that. And then I'm gonna pass it over to Stephanie in a moment, but I just want to tell you a little bit about Angels Gate Cultural Center. We are a nonprofit in San Pedro, and we aim to provide opportunities for artists while serving our local communities in the South Bay Harbor region with meaningful experiences in art and culture. Our exhibition program aims to explore new ideas in contemporary art and provide opportunities for artists and independent curators. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Stephanie Sherwood. She is our guest curator and artist who in 2022 responded to our open call for curatorial proposals, and Portals was selected for its strength in curatorial vision and for its dynamic group of artists. So Stephanie, please join us.
Thank you so much for that intro, Cecilia. I'm Stephanie Sherwood. I'm the curator of Portals. I conceptualized this exhibition specific for Angels Gate, particularly in reference to its location up above the hills by the Port of Los Angeles. So the concept was really focusing on gateways and doorways as a potential for change, specifically thinking about the Port of Los Angeles, which is a massive economic power. And really, the exhibition speaks to how the port changed the city of Los Angeles. The artworks on view focus on contemplating ideas of boundaries, entrance and egress, progress, and travel into the unknown. With that in mind, I am extremely fortunate to have been able to work with this amazing group of artists that we are sharing virtual space with tonight. Their practice are all vastly different and come at this idea of portals from totally different angles. I'm just so thrilled to have been able to bring together this group in the gallery here at Angels Gate. The team is amazing, and they really helped me realize my vision for the show. And we have just like this very expansive and diverse body of works here. We have fiber art, sculpture, collage. We have a documentation of an earthwork. We have drawings, we have paintings. We have large-scale sculpture and site-specific installations. So I'm very honored to have been able to realize the vision here and excited to be able to introduce our artists one by one. So we're just gonna have a little chat, and we will be doing a Q&A portion at the end of the talk. So if you have any burning questions that come up while we're talking, feel free to plug those into the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. Let me see. Are there any other housekeeping things I'm forgetting? I think Cecilia already mentioned a lot of the important ones, so we're probably good to get into it. Alrighty, so firstly, I would like to invite Yevgeniya Mikhailik to discuss her work. I'm going to go ahead and get into the questions here. I am so excited to have a full series of works of yours that are being exhibited together for the very first time. Can you talk a little bit about the Great Heath Barrow how you encountered it and how it led you to the Barrow series.
Yeah, sure. So this work was started and largely completed in the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic. I was in residence at Cowhouse Studios in Ireland, and the focus of my residency there was this this body of work. It was very brief. I was only there for a week, but I did get a chance to kind of travel a little bit around the country right before starting the work there. So that's sort of where the inspiration for the series came from. And one of the reasons I went to Ireland in the first place was because I was really fascinated with, land formations from prehistory, standing stones, burial mounds, burial chambers, and things like that, which are very much integral part of the landscape, but at the same time, clearly, in a lot of cases, clearly man-made, but in a lot of cases, very indiscernible from naturally occurring kind of landscape features. And there are tons of them in Ireland, like the whole country is just peppered with them, and you don't often even realize that you're on the site until you really start to look at how the land is formed, excuse me. And so my husband went with me, and we took a quick, like 2-day road trip across the entire country, because it takes 3 hours to drive across the country. It's great. And we came across this little tiny roadside kind of burial mound it's so discreet. It's like right next to a post office in the middle of nowhere. It's not marked in any way. It's not touristed, and it's just this really magical kind of tiny, and by tiny I mean like, I don't know, maybe 40 feet across, tiny by land formation standards. It's a burial site, most likely, or potentially a ritual site from sometime in 4300 BC-ish. And it was this really kind of amazing, intimate experience being there on the site with nobody around. It was one of the windiest days on record in the area, to the point where like a giant truck turned over on the freeway. Like there's nobody outside, and me and my husband standing on the side of the road, and our car is just like shaking. We're like, we're getting out to look at this thing. And that like extreme weather plus just being there by ourselves in a very kind of quiet environment was really kind of magical. And being able to walk around the structure and really feel like, okay, this is a really special place, even though it just happens to be kind of on the side of the road without anybody really paying attention to it, unlike some of the other, like the Stonehenges and the New Granges of the world. And spending time with it was really kind of I don't know, it had this really sort of magical feel to it. Like walking around the outer bank of the structure really felt like you're kind of on like the ridge or an edge of a ripple that sort of moves in this kind of outward motion, but it's obviously a solid structure. So I started thinking about kind of the dynamic of like what would happen if this actually moved, right? And going into the residency, I was kind of starting to explore this idea of, okay, this is a static object or static kind of structure, but it is so reminiscent of a ripple or of like something that actually moves, shifts, and the idea of like it kind of opening up as a portal to something that's kind of mysterious, that's several millennia old. That was really interesting. So I kind of started reimagining it as a moving, kind of living, almost like a being. And then the end of that series, the last 2 drawings of the series, I finished just before the exhibition, actually. So yeah, this one, and I believe there's another one. So it sort of, yeah, like opens up into this portal of light that is kind of the unknown, but also, sort of sheds light onto like how these structures would have been made or how they would have been used. And it was really interesting, like thinking about the way that these communities would have interacted with land. Obviously a very different relationship with land that weren't the one that we have now. We kind of approach most land related things from the position of colonizing and trying to conquer or rework land to our own advantage versus these communities that are so connected to land. Obviously, that's their livelihood, and so it's kind of an extension of the body. Like that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it, and about the ways that these structures are being made, right? It's a burial site that is kind of bringing you back into the earth, into the body from which you essentially came, right? So that's sort of the thinking behind a lot of this work, and kind of the direction I'm working towards in exploring these kind of man-made / naturally occurring land formations. And this work is all graphite on paper. It's made with liquid graphite at first, and then with just regular pencil, like finished as a drawing. So it's both kind of a drawing and a painting.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Yevgeniya. If anyone hasn't seen the show in person yet, I highly recommend it. You really just need to like get up close to these and just see all the beautiful little marks.
Mm-hmm.
I've been pretty obsessed with Yevgeniya's work for a very long time. Very excited to be able to exhibit them here in Portals at Angel's Gate.
Thank you so much.
And then keeping with this kind of theme of like exploring the earth, I wanted to then transition over to Howard Schwartzberg next. I'm very excited to hear some more about your work. So let's get into it. In Portals, you are exhibiting several different series from the open space bandage paintings, which are more recent works, to the beginning and end drawings from 1993, as well as images of surface from 1999 to 2000. And that is the earthwork. What ideas have come up for you seeing these different series in conversation with one another in the gallery?
Oh, thank you. I get to see that I'm pretty old and I did a lot of work. And it was interesting listening to your first artist. Sorry, I forgot how to pronounce your name. Yevgeniya. Yevgeniya. Yes, my artwork kind of relates a little bit to your work in terms of going into the earth, and it's kind of like a primitive setting. Wanted to put the viewer on a different perspective with the earth, to be eye level with it. So actually, when you walk into this earthwork, you walk into kind of like a pit, and you are eye level with the surface. So it kind of created an intimate space and a new relationship to the earth that we're used to, because we're always walking on top of it. But anyway, in the what I also noticed with all the works together, seeing them at the same time, which I never really have shown an exhibit with these three different types of work. I saw some commonalities, especially in materials that I use, and most of them are related to nature or they're raw materials. So I could explain some of them. So like for instance, with the drawings that I made, the beginning and end drawings, I would use dirt and wax on them. And what I would basically do is, they're basically writings. And when I finished the writings, I was a young artist, and a lot of things were going through my mind about being an artist or living as an artist, and making paintings specifically. So I was saying or writing these things and kind of would step on them when I would finish, and that's where the dirt came from. So it was kind of like I don't know, embarrassed or who am I to say these things? Because I was so young. But I covered them with dirt from the bottom of my shoes. And then at the same time after, I would take some wax and rub wax over them and preserve them. So it was kind of like I'm saying these things, but I shouldn't be saying these things, but I want to save them anyway because I still think they're important, but I don't even know. Um, so those, but basically they were about living as an artist and about making paintings. The paintings pretty much are the fuel for most of my work. And for the paintings, the old paintings or even the newer recent paintings, I always use raw canvas or burlap or canvas with a very loose weave. To me, like burlap is like the first weave or something like a naked canvas. Um, and what I would like to do is, apply paint um, not to the canvas itself, but to have the canvas hold the paint in new ways. So kind of creating new perspectives to see, what a painting could be or how it can evolve or be pushed to a new place. So yeah, so materials are very important. They all have a meaning. And work to try to say what I'm trying to do with painting.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're
There's
welcome.
surface. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
there's the earthwork. It took about 6 months to create.
wow.
It was very intense, but it was worth every minute. I'm so glad I was able to do that.
I love that little detail at the lip of the front where it looks like a drip, like the grass is like dripping, kind of.
Oh, yeah, it's like I never made an earthwork before. I was making giant paintings like the way that earthwork looks, and I used the form and the shapes of my paintings to say something else about the environment and not just about painting. So this was about the environment and, back, it's 1999. So, the environmental movement was starting to kick in and it felt right and it worked. So it was nice to see. And I'm very honored that I was able to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Howard.
You're welcome.
Alrighty, so we are now going to talk to Erin Harmon, the lovely Erin Harmon, who's out in Memphis and joining us from a different time zone, just as Howard and Esther are. So thank you again. Thank you again for all your time, everyone. Like, just thrilled to have you here. So let me get into the question for Erin. In many of the works exhibited in portals, you create these rich, imaginative spaces. Can you talk a little bit more about the graphic elements which reappear in your work as compositional elements?
Sure, yeah, a little bit different from Yevgeniya and Howard's pieces. My works are really kind of detached from the earth. The environments in my spaces, in my works are really, they are sort of fairy tale like. And also I see them as a metaphor for my studio. So for 20-ish years, I've been working with abstracted forms, which in my mind connote a sense of landscape. And these include an island or a pile, like the piece in the show, The Life of the Moon, maybe inside. Also wreaths, which I see as a pile with a hole in it or a line that connects to itself. Arbors or arches, which is a curved line or a niche, and those are seen in the piece.
Oh, did we lose Erin temporarily?
Oh, I guess so. I wasn't sure if it was me.
That's all right. This happens. There's always one instance, right, for every Zoom event. So how about we give Erin a minute to sort of join with us, and if Stephanie, you don't mind, if we can go to the next artist on our schedule.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no worries. We can skip ahead and come back to Erin. I'd love to hear more about her practice. Oh, the internet, goodness. Okay. So jumping ahead, I would like to invite Svetlana Shigroff to the Zoom stand, to talk a little bit about her beautiful tufted tapestries. So let me jump into the question here. Svetlana, you have spoken a little bit about how the neon in your color palette is connected to these otherworldly creatures and deities. Can you describe a bit more about how your palette supports your ideas?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as I have mentioned, and I'm not sure how many people have heard me talk about it yet, but a lot of my work is using reclaimed materials from the fashion industry. And I predominantly gather my materials from secondary jobbers, and secondary jobbers are, stores in which the waste, sort of excess materials, trims and whatnot that come from the sort of factories and whatnot that perhaps are in LA or, around the States. They get funneled there and they get resold to the public. And so it's kind of like a way in which for those materials to not end up in landfill straight away, and sort of also a really sort of financially viable way for a lot of textile artists to utilize those materials. And so a lot of my work actually ends up being somewhat of a kind of whatever was like, in fashion a couple of seasons ago or last season or whatnot is what's generally available in those sort of establishments. And I use a lot of those in my work. So it is an interesting sort of way or like a limitation that I have within my work. So it definitely sort of like reflects sort of the fashion industry and the trends of like colors and whatnot. And I, as time has kind of developed, I've always been attracted to sort of very saturated colors in my work, and I'm definitely a maximalist. And we'll try to throw the entire rainbow at a thing. But I have sort of been using a lot of neon in my work. And neon specifically, I just feel there's this like really interesting quality to it in terms of it being a artificially sort of created palette. So I kind of like, so they're sort of like super saturated versions of what we see in nature. And when it comes to my, sort of the creatures, the monsters, the deities that I have in my sort of universe, I see a correlation of them not being from this realm either. They are from my imagination, from my mind. And so the neons I've kind of associated with being sort of these suited to these sort of creatures that I have. And they're kind of like, it's like a tinkering of like, from my head through my mediums of materials and whatnot. And I think that also neons like have this strange place where they're firmly in the category of other. They're sort of obnoxious, abhorrent, they sort of generally speaking, they're kind of seen as bad taste or like to be used with with limitation and whatnot. And I think that there's also this really interesting I think it just works. It works for me in terms of like how they kind of are a little bit, I think there's like an interesting correlation with the work that I do with the psyche and where I'm sitting in these uncomfortable places, and doing that sort of work that seems to, in my mind, make sense to use these sort of colors as well.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that was, I mean, there's so many interesting layers to all of your works, all of the artists that we have here. But I was, when we had discussed your work the last time I saw you, I thought that this was just a really interesting concept of the neon, and these otherworldly creatures and these just very magical beings that you work with. Amazing. Yeah. And do we have Erin back? I didn't know if.
I think I'm back.
I hear you. I think you're here. You know what? The universe just said, we're going to switch it up a little bit.
Yeah, I just blew Zoom's mind. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, it was like, too much, I don't understand. But at least in terms of the kind of trajectory that I imagined with the conversation, it was almost like with Yevgeniya and Howard, we were talking about the earth and this like amazing experience of the earth. And then when we got into Svetlana and Erin, it's like, we're leaving the earth. We're getting into something like we've left earth and we're in these other imaginative realms now.
Yeah, and I love that Svetlana talked about her work as being like a manifestation of what goes on in her mind. And I think about my work the same, but more about the landscape of my studio and the studio as like a relationship that I'm having with myself and these forms or ideas over a series of years. So I was saying that, I focus on a sort of a collection of elemental forms, and they're sort of basic building blocks of picture making, but they're also forms that I think of as evocative of a sense of place. So they're elements of landscape that have become object-like in some way. I'm always interested in my imagery as being potential site for narrative to transpire. I used to be a figurative painter, and many years ago I removed the figure. So I really think about these as sites where something is waiting to happen. I'm personally really interested in and influenced by art and other visual culture, but also narratives like novels and fairy tales and myth. And I particularly like imagery that reoccurs in narratives or imagery that's been reused across eras and cultures. A space that's like this that we all know of is a garden space, right? A garden is a visual lure and a symbol. It's played a heavy role in the human psyche throughout history, in myth, in religious narrative, in literature as a setting for supernatural visitations and sexual awakening and a metaphor for female sexuality. A garden is a place that is not a space that occurs naturally. It's a purely human kind of creative act. And it's a place that humans go to escape from the real world, but also a garden makes you feel more present in the world. And I think the studio does that too. Like it's a place where you go to escape, but also feel more present and alive. So none of my works are verbatim interpretations of specific places, but more trying to capture a sensation of experiencing the world.
That's so amazing. And I actually since we were just on this topic of color with Svetlana's work, I would also love to if you don't mind, to talk, get into how color is this like massive like player in your practice, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about color.
Yeah, sure. Like color was definitely the thing that attracted me to become a painter as a young artist. And it's the thing that still is the driving force behind my work. I was trained as an oil painter, and I really believe in the sort of the primacy of painting as the process for learning about color. There's nothing like, you know, adding little bits of this color and this color to try to match mix a color to understand like the parentage of any given color. You know, Amy Silman writes about the physicality of color in painting, and that like certain tubes of oil paint are heavier than others, and that like as a painter you can feel that blindfolded, like the difference between certain kinds of paint. And although I don't make oil paintings anymore, the physicality of pushing and pulling the paint and mixing paint is just a way of touching this like amorphous physical sensation of experiencing color. So in my work, color always comes first, and I use a color aid kit to find the palette for everything that I make. And because I'm looking for optical kinds of interactions, which are really central to how my work functions. And I'm striving to create a sense of light and atmosphere, and also to create or disrupt figure ground relationships through value and attention to temperature.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's the cadmium. The cadmium is always the answer, right?
Heavy.
It's cadmium. All right, so I will now transition over to our amazing sculptor, Esther Ruiz, to talk a little bit about her work. Again, with these works that really kind of create imaginary spaces, these kind of imaginative spaces. Something that is so engaging about Esther's work is that it has the effect of inspiring dreams of other worlds or dimensions. Esther, would you mind talking a little bit about how you use materials in your work to support this experience?
Sure. Yes. So this body of work is rooted in depicting fictional landscapes, a lot like some of the other artists in the show. And while at Rhodes, I took this geology course and was really interested in minerals, and then I was incorporating those into freestanding works. And the works that are in the show at Angel's Gate are actually, I initially thought of them as portals or windows or entry points into these fictional landscapes that I was making prior to the wall works. I use neon, obviously, and a lot of the works in the show are colored near, and I think this sort of, they're usually placed slightly above eye level, and when they're in a room together, they reflect on one another and they like warp the viewer's space. So there's sort of this kind of like distant thing you look into that also like reflects your place and then warps it at the same time. A lot of the colors that I choose, especially the blues and the pinks, there's this amazing photograph taken from the rover on Mars of the sun setting, and it's just this really hazy blue, and it feels so otherworldly to me, and it's just like my favorite image. And that's kind of the idea that I'm thinking about constantly, is what landscapes look like from other planets and other places, and these wall works act as windows to those places.
Oh my gosh, so amazing! I love hearing about the Mars rover. these kind of these inspirations for your amazing sculptural works. I love this photograph too.
Yeah, it's so great. The reflection is great.
Yeah, I love that. I'm actually curious. I guess this is just kind of an off the dome question, but have you had any other like kind of interesting interactions between your works and other artworks and other group exhibitions? Like, how has that opened up any kind of thoughts or ideas about how your works are seen?
Oh, sure, totally. Yeah, I mean, this shows a great example of how they play off of each other. And I mean, I feel like this is pretty spot on and sort of like an entry point to another realm, into the mind of someone else who's depicting other places with color. But yeah, I mean, I think every time it's interesting to see what happens, like the things that I make because they're reflective or not, like there's no prescription for it. They change every time they're put in a new space. So it's nice to see them change. Like I kind of put them out in the world and then they come back, photos come back to me and they're always different. So it's like I'm in some ways like mirroring the world around us, but like changing it in a way. And it's fun for me to see images that come back and what people, I mean, I'm not a fan of the selfie, but that happens a lot. And it's just so fun to see people like interact with them and the reflections that come about and all the different places they go.
So cool. Yeah. I love that. I love the idea that you just send them out into the world and see them reflected back into you. Yeah, little portals just to hang out with other works and other people and see all of that. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Of course. So then I guess that's a good transition to Erika Lizée, whose work you got a little sneak peek of in the reflection there of Esther's work. Erika created one of two massive site-specific installation works in portals and in the gallery. And I'm just like, you know, as a curator, like sometimes there's always like, you can never fully understand what you're like what you can expect when things start to really come into the gallery. And you know, this one specifically, because it was being created on site at the gallery, was like, it was very cool to see it materializing. And you know, I already had high expectations because I know Erika's work is amazing, but it blew me away when I saw it finally completed. We'll jump into the question. For portals, you created a monumental work entitled "The Subtle Body Prepares for Emergence." Can you describe the process of creating this piece?
Sure. It's funny you say that, you know, you weren't sure what the work was going to look like, and I don't either until I actually install the work, because I have, you know, the design and the idea in my head, and I have the pieces I painted in my studio, but the work is never fully realized until I install it, because I am doing so much of it in that moment. And so there's always that reaction for me too of, oh, how did this turn out? How close to my vision is it or not? So it's kind of, at first when I started doing installations back in 2013, I was very uncomfortable with that. And then over time I was like, okay, it's going to turn into something that I can live with, you know. So there's always that kind of gap between what you think it might be and then what it turns out like. But yeah, so to talk a little bit about the process, let's see, I started doing the installations back in 2013. And then after a couple of years, I think it was 2016, then I came across this book, which I don't know if anybody else is aware of this book. It's a super cool book. It's called The Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, The Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, A Voyage from 1 to 10. And it goes through the numbers 1 through 10, and it goes through all different cultures and times and pulls out, you know, each number. And so I thought that that was a really interesting idea, and that I wanted to make an installation based on the number 1 through, you know, each number 1 through 10. So far I've done 6 numbers. And so this piece for this show is based on the number 7. So in my process, I start with the physical space of the gallery. We did a site visit, and I get those dimensions and kind of map them out. And then thinking about the number 7 and the research and, you know, what I wanted this piece to look like and for it to be about. So in all of my installations, I start with the premise that the gallery wall is a threshold, and that I'm going to create the illusion that there's this other realm that kind of exists inside of that space. For me, it's the realm of the unknown, a realm where, you know, unnatural things can occur, magical, mystical things can occur. And for me, for this piece, I wanted it to reference an idea of pre-existence. And if there is some mystical aspect of us that exists before we are born, and then if a part of that comes out as we're born into the physical space. So when you're looking at this image, you can see there's the red, and it kind of goes through those 7 colors of the spectrum, and those are in relationship to the 7 chakras. And that is the energy centers that are part of the body, that subtle body that kind of overlays our physical body when we're emerging into the world. So I know I wanted to include the 7 chakras, and then also there's that heptagon there on the left. And so starting with those elements and having the idea that the flow of the piece was really going from the left to the right, and then the kind of tendril that emerges out into the physical space of the gallery. So there's a lot of design that goes on. I love tracing paper. I'm on my graph paper, kind of figuring out layers, coming up with designs, coming up with an overarching design for the piece, and then figuring out kind of where the portals will be. Another technical part of the process is, so I'm painting on like the part that you see here that's in color with the black, that's all painted on Duralar, which is like an artist grade acetate. And then all the stuff that's gray and white, that's been painted directly onto the wall in the gallery space. So one of the restrictions is that the Duralar that I get, it's only 40 inches wide. So when I'm thinking about making a piece that's, 30 or 40 feet long, when I'm figuring out how big everything has to be, I have to keep it within those. No single portal can be bigger than 40 inches. So that's kind of another piece. But I do a lot of drawing. I will take pictures and scan things, and then I'll put it into Photoshop and play around with things a little bit there, figuring out, size and scale and all those things. And then once I get a design that I'm really happy with, then I will tape together a bunch of big sheets of paper, and then I'll project my image, because typically my drawing is pretty small, and then I'll project it so that I have my pattern. And that's kind of my big pattern, and I'll draw everything. And then I lay the Duralar on top of that and kind of cut out the shapes, tape it on there. And then typically I'll start painting with it all on the wall. And then because it's many, 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 many hours of painting, I end up taking each kind of portal area. I have an easel in my studio, and I'll take it down. Once the design is on there, then I'll take it down, and I'll just be sitting at my easel kind of working that way. And then I'll put it back up on the wall, pull off another panel, kind of go back and forth like that until I feel like everything is the way I want it. And then for the tendril piece, that's another kind of small drawing that gets projected and turned into a bigger kind of shape, painting that. And then, so then the installation, as you saw, Stephanie, all the people at Angels Gate were so nice, and as I'm laboring away with my headphones on, but it's a lot of just painting on the wall, kind of laying things out. So taking my big pattern, figuring out placement of where it's going to go, putting all of the elements onto the wall, kind of drawing around them. So then I have a contour drawing on the wall. And then I come in with my paints and I just start painting. And I think it was, I don't remember now, it's kind of a blur, but it was maybe 2 or 3 days of painting. And then once that's pretty close to what I want it to be, then I'll put the panels back up temporarily. And that's when I go through and make tiny edits, because so much of the illusion really relies on tight areas. So it requires me to go back in and just, make edits and make sure everything is just right in that space. So that you get that really believable kind of illusion overall.
Amazing. Thank you so much for walking us through that process. Mm-hmm. And the tendril that you mentioned is that pink element. I don't know if we can go back to the overall picture that shows, that's the one, the tendril, right?
Yeah, and so that is it's just flat in my studio. I paint it, it's on the wall, and I just paint it. And then when I'm hanging the show, then it's suspended by monofilament. And so there's a piece that's touching kind of where the red is to create the illusion that it's kind of going into the wall, and then it's emerging and floating in the gallery space. So there's typically in my work, there's the elements that feel like they're inside of the wall, maybe on the wall, emerging from the wall into the physical space of the viewer.
Yeah, awesome. Actually, another kind of off the dome question, I've had a couple of people ask me about this in the gallery, is those little hanging bits that come off of the pink tendril. I know they're so lovely. Again, you guys have to see it in person. If you haven't, you just got it. Can you tell us a little bit about those guys and what they represent?
Sure. Yeah, those are pieces that I've used in multiple projects where it's the same material, it's the Duralar, but it's clear. And the picture doesn't really show you, but it's clear. And I cut them into shapes and then stitch them together. So they look kind of like transparent orbs. And then inside of that, I had painted, I think it was maybe like 35 flower kind of forms, I'll say flower-like forms on both sides of a piece of Duralar. And then I went through this process of scanning those and printing them out in different values, and then cutting those out and kind of constructing. So I have a lot of these. What you see here is maybe like a fifth of what I have. So I'll add them to different installations depending on kind of what's going on in the space. And to me, they feel like kind of little, because they rotate and they kind of sparkle a little bit in the light, and it just feels like a little element of like a little glimmer of life. And it has that flower kind of element, which to me is like the notion of things being in the physical world and kind of floating out into the world. It seems almost like a dandelion when you blow it and it kind of floats away, to have some of that where it's flowing into the gallery space.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, it does really have that feeling like they're being blown from the work. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Erika.
Thank you.
So we are going to transition to Alicia Pillar, who created another site-specific work for portals. I mean, I'm obsessed with all these artists, obviously, because I put them in the show, but been obsessed with Alicia's work for a very long time. She also has several other exhibitions up on view right now. She's got one at TAM, she's got one at Track 16, probably forgetting some stuff, but you guys got to get out and see those in person if you haven't already. So she made an amazing piece that fits in an area of the gallery that I kind of think about as a portal, because the gallery is kind of like two galleries connected by this little vestibule kind of space. So that is where Alicia's gorgeous sculpture is sited. So let me get into the question here. Your piece, Blue Memories, Flooding Back, Navigating Tongva Waters, was created as a site-specific work for this particular architectural portal in the gallery at Angels Gate Cultural Center. Can you describe some of the research involved in creating the work and how it guided the process?
Yes, thank you, first of all, for having me. The show is amazing. It's gorgeous. And I love hearing everybody talk about what they've done. And I got to see Erika painting. And I just want to say to Esther, my parents and I had a great time taking selfies. We really enjoyed the show. So to answer your question, I already in my practice like to look to history, to look back in time. I'm always like going on my own energetic journey to try to mine, how did we get here today? How is humanity the way that it is? And so for this project, it was kind of like this exciting moment for me to research something new, which happened to be San Pedro. And because it was about portals, and I was really thinking about, San Pedro as, it's the port of LA, and it's this global port where all of these things are coming into the country. And it's an amazing sight to see. And that's actually why I love going to San Pedro. It's like so fascinating. And sculpture, I'm a sculptor. I love sculpture. So it's literally these sculptural objects stacked, and it's just impressive. But for me, the real question was, what was here before, and how did this even come to be this? So I did a lot of research. I was like, in my own practice anyway, I'm always looking to news headlines and going back in time to look at news articles. So I did a little bit of that, but I also went straight to like, Tongva has its own website, so you can learn about all of the indigenous cultures in the area. So that was like a really lovely way for me to just dive right in. So what I decided to do was I wanted to do this counterclockwise sort of motion, literally taking us back in time. And to start that motion, I decided to find these images of, what did that time look like when actual Native American people were living here and this was their land. So I was able to, source some images, some drawings from when, colonial people came over and were mapping out the land. And so I used a lot of these historic images to sort of like start telling the story. So you can see at the bottom of this work, there's like these tiny little images. And when you get up close, you can see they're all connected by this red thread. And so to continue forward in history, I started to learn about the port being basically a military base, and where all these ships were coming in for war. It was a fishing town for a lot of Japanese families. It was so culturally diverse, and all of these like things were happening all at once. So again, I was mining all these images, and so there's like this progression going up towards the wall. And so for me, it's about, and I love that everybody's in their own sort of universe, their own sort of like world. And for me, my world is, how do you translate the energetic? How do I create, show history and time and, all of it in one moment, that it's all happening at once. And so I'm always challenging myself to do, like, if there's a trauma, what does that look like? What does that residue look like? What does that energy look like? And how to show it, using all of my crazy materials. And for this piece, my main material is vinyl, but vinyl gets ritually wrapped around anything I use, whether it's a tiny seed, whether it's a giant shape. And so that wrapping becomes the skin. And so I am also making these like creatures, monsters, they become a sort of energetic being from this past, from this history. And so basically it was a challenge in a really amazing way, because I had to build, this is a super specific shape and I had to build it in my studio, and I didn't know how it would really be until it got there. So it was really kind of scary and fun, and I really learned so much. And I just in terms of history and in terms of like, how do you tackle a space? I mean, that's just on a very basic art level. I was like, you're learning the space itself and all of the pipes and things on the ceiling. But anyway, I really enjoyed being able to, create my own portal. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity. And I think honestly too, I just want to say, Stephanie, you are such a great curator. Now that I'm seeing and hearing everybody speak, it all connects. And even I think you have a thing for neon, so I think it's your fault. Yes. But yeah, but yeah, so that's my spiel. I don't know if you have any more.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I wish I had more, like hours and hours more to just talk to all of you and just probe you about all these different, like I have 1,000 more questions, but we only have so much time. This is great. I love how you're describing trying to, formulate the energy of all these things, this history that you're learning about in these places, and then learning about the architecture through making this thing. It's all great. I love you all. I'm going to transition now to our final gallery artist, Elana Mann. Thrilled to have you in the show. Very, very interested in just, I think your work has, kind of like Esther's work, it's very interactive. Wherever you put it, it's going to have this other completely different context. And it's been really fun for me to see how your works have been kind of bouncing energy off of the other things in the gallery. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the question here. Your work is so much about listening and inspiring listening. Can you talk specifically about the works that you have in Portals and their relationship to listening and community?
Yeah, so thank you, Stephanie. And I've just enjoyed so much hearing all of the artists talk about their work. I don't think I've ever been in an artist talk where I've heard magical, that word used so much, and I really appreciated that. So I've never thought about my work in terms of portals, but just listening to everyone talk, I realized that there is a portal element of my work in terms of that I'm thinking so much about the portals of the human body and also of the body politic. So I'm thinking about like ears and mouths and voices. I have two pieces in the show, and one of them is it's a 10-foot, 6-person protest horn. It's called Our Work Is Never Done, Unfinished Business, and it's from 2020. And then there's another piece, which you can see right here, which is a sculptural edition of a sculpture called the Histophone, which I finished in 2016. And I really think of these sculptures and their use like socially in the world and politically. And I think about them in terms of like amplifying collective voices or facilitating and adding to social justice movements and struggles. So the sculpture, Our Work Is Never Done, Unfinished Business, it has these 6 mini megaphone tubes that are connected to a large horn base, which you can see here. So 6 people can speak and can vocalize through the horn and be amplified simultaneously. This sculpture really represents the first time that I have created something that amplifies sound and also necessitates listening. So I've created a lot of interactive sculptures that use, that amplify sound, that make sound, that amplify the human voice. But I haven't, there's usually just like a listening receptor, somebody that's like on the other side, listening to the sound that's being created, for example, or the sculpture itself is like a listening sculpture and amplifies sound. But this sculpture in particular, since there's 6 participants, they have to work together as a collective. It's very big, it's very cumbersome. So they have to figure out, how they're gonna move, how they're gonna carry the sculpture together, how they're gonna speak through it, what they wanna say, what their message is. And so just like inherent in its use is this idea of collectivity. And it is based off of this folk music instrument by a folk music promoter and teacher named Charles Chase. He created this folk musical instrument called the mega kazoo horn, and his had 6 siren whistles, so like that kind of sound and whistle, and he would bring his mega kazoo horn out onto the street in protests, like in the 1970s. He was a very active member of the Communist Party. And I was just so taken by this folk instrument that I found at his center in the Folk Music Center and Museum in Claremont. I really wanted to make my own. but I wanted to modify it so that it would amplify voice, not just like make these siren whistles. And I really envisioned bringing it out into the street and using it in protests and using it in performance. I was so excited about the potential of this sculpture to just like add play and creativity to political spaces and spaces of demonstration and resistance. And I started the sculpture right before the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's so ironic or not that the sculpture like necessitates sharing 6 breaths, like the air of 6 people. So it's, you know, as the pandemic has progressed, it's just, it just has been continuously like unsafe to use. And I finished it, obviously, you can see it right here, but it remains unplayed. And I guess there's something that's like a metaphorical about that, or symbolic, that here is this like sculpture that demands collectivity and demands interdependence and coexistence. And like, we still haven't been able to use it, kind of like sums up this time that we're living in right now. But I hope someday that I will be able to use it finally. The other sculpture, the histophone, I thought of them first as listening devices. My grandfather was hard of hearing, and he used to use this kind of ear cupping strategy to hear people better. And I was looking a lot at the time at hearing aids from the late 19th century and early 20th century, and how they were using like passive technologies, like ear horns and like these conal shapes and stuff that receive sound and amplify sound just naturally. And that's how I initially thought of them. But then I brought them to a, oh, and I should mention, there's like an inner channel of the sculpture. So there's a hole in the palm of the hand, and that's connected to, there you can see it, that's connected to the bell, the shape that's at the end of the sculpture. So I was really thinking about them as like listening devices, like hearing aids. And then I brought them to a workshop, and I saw somebody put it up to their mouth and speak through it, and their voice was amplified. And it just blew my mind, because I'd never thought about them being used in that way. And that's something that I love about my sculptures, is that their meaning is really constantly in flux or changing depending on the context, depending on how they're being used and who's using them, or where they're being displayed, or are they on the street, or are they in the gallery. That's just really interesting to me. And just seeing how the palm of the hand was literally covering up someone's mouth, but then their voice was still being amplified and magnified. It just really spoke to me, because it just spoke to the resilience of the human voice, and how, even though there are often political players or extremist groups are trying to silence other voices, that there's this resiliency that people have if they work together. So
I love it. Thank you so much, Elana. And I do want to say that although the big beautiful horn has not been played together yet because of the challenges of COVID-19, while you were talking about how it's this object that really demands cooperation between other people, I was thinking about the installation, and how, we had to work together to carefully and safely install the work. So it was almost like we had to have this very intense cooperation where everything was laid out, and we were making sure everyone knew what was happening, who was touching what, and everything, to make sure that it all went down. So in that sense, I think it really did inspire this nice little, cooperation between us, the crew. So that takes us to the end of our structured talk. I will pass the torch over to Cecilia Koger to kick off our Q&A period. If there's any questions that come to mind for any of the amazing artists or me, not as interesting, but you can ask me a question too. Put it in the chat. Very excited to talk to you all.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all of the artists who have really just been super thoughtful and also a little bit vulnerable in sharing about your practice and your work. It's always a pleasure to hear the artists speak. Once I've been so intimate with the works in this space, I love the additional context of listening to you all. While everyone is maybe thinking of your questions, go ahead and feel free to use the Q&A feature. It's at the bottom of the Zoom. I want to quickly mention that Angels Gate Cultural Center, we're a nonprofit organization. We're not a commercial gallery. So we're really grateful for other organizations that support the arts in Los Angeles and Southern California. In particular, the Pasadena Art Alliance, the Port of Los Angeles Community Investment Program, and the Department of Cultural Affairs are all sponsors of this exhibit. So thank you to those sponsors for enabling this fantastic show. So I have a couple questions. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. However, I would like to start with a question to Alicia while it's fresh in our minds and we just looked at her work. So the question is about the space and sort of the all-encompassing nature of your work. If we look at the work, and actually let me share a better view so you can kind of see what I'm referencing. So this is our virtual exhibit. It is currently available on our website, but I think this will be really helpful for reference. So as you sort of pass through your work, it seems to wash over you, the viewer. It's all encompassing. And perhaps this is projecting, but I'm wondering if that was intentional, as it also references the washing over of Native histories. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the form and your choices in creating this installation.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. I think that, you know, ultimately I like to work with a lot of detail. So if you have the time, people will stop and really dissect what they're seeing. But I think that in general, and no offense to anyone, but, a lot of times we walk past, we, take a glimpse, but we're not diving super deep. And I think that really does speak to the, washing over of culture and history. Absolutely. And then that layer of it being me representing water is literally a washing away of history, of time.
Thank you. Yeah, I just really appreciate the fact that you're utilizing that really interesting space. This is probably one of the most successful uses of this really odd space in our gallery. And I just really appreciate your creativity and sort of translating that feeling. And it totally translates when you actually stand with the work, and it's very impressive. Again, everyone needs to see it in person, so come to the gallery. We're open through March 26th. So thank you for that. And now kind of changing gears a little bit, I kind of want to change directions, and this is sort of related, but this is a question for Yevgeniya. And I'm wondering, while I'm asking the question, if we could pull up some images of her work, in particular, gate and kidney. If you don't mind pulling those up. Thank you, Amanda. And this question for Yevgeniya is about what role does water and viscosity have in your work and inspiration? I personally feel like this is very apparent in these two works that I'm referencing in the show. So I'm wondering if we can pull those up on screen. Thank you. And if you kind of want to respond to that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a couple of things happening with water is a very important element in creating all of these works. And one of the things, just as a material, it's really important because the way that it interacts with the paper that I work with is really interesting. So all of these works are on UPO, which is essentially like a plastic paper. It's not really paper, but looks like paper, but made of plastic. So it repels water, but it also is absorbent in a very different kind of way. So all of the kind of drips and really kind of unpredictable washes that are happening there are the function of water or water-based media interacting with the paper in a very kind of its own way. Like there's not really a whole lot of ways to control it, which is really interesting as kind of like a conversation with the material, right? So I'm not 100% sure where the work is going to go when I started. And that unpredictability is kind of a major part of being able to kind of have this image reveal itself as opposed to me, completely controlling it. And with kidney, so this piece was kind of loosely based on thinking about like, the function of the kidney as a cleanser, right? But also just the visual shape of it. It's just a fascinating looking organ. And it has these like kind of inlets and outlets and, things kind of going in and out of this shape. I'm also thinking like relating it back to landscape and thinking about lakes and bodies of water and, rivers feeding into lakes, coming back out of them, etc. So it is sort of a connection between the body and landscape in that way. And then with gate is sort of both a mound and an open space. So it's kind of like convex and concave at the same time. And that water, like the drips in that drawing, kind of go into the space and lead the viewer into it, but also kind of repel almost a little bit. So water is both like kind of a conceptual element and 100% a material that is integral to being able to even create these pieces. And there is a lot of interaction between water and ink and paint that is again completely unpredictable, and the difference in viscosity of ink versus viscosity of watercolor and water or liquid graphite and things like that, they interact in ways that kind of guide how the work is going to end up looking. So it is, water sort of plays a role in like revealing the image, or like as a tool for discovery for all of these works, if that answers the question sort of a roundabout way.
Yes, it does. We are gonna be coming short on time, but there's so many great questions. So I'm gonna kind of sidetrack now and ask a very interesting question that we got for Svetlana about some of your works. So this question is from Lori. In your work, what does the symbolism of the open mouths mean for you? And I really like this comment that the open mouths feel audible.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, it okay, so like I finished this really large tapestry work called Black Bikini and Tan Hiking Boots. And that piece had these particular characters at the top of it that were kind of like their screaming skull sort of motif. And initially those kind of I realized they came to kind of represent like sort of like a precipice, the transfer of energy from one form to the other. In that particular piece, it was actually that piece in particular was about violence, violence against femmes at the hands of their lovers, and in that piece. It was specifically a woman who was murdered in the Mojave. And that was finished and shown in March 2020, just before COVID-19 hit the States. And so it was kind of one of those things where, for me, a lot of the layers in my work becomes more apparent after time has passed, after the piece is finished. A lot of the elements that I place in my work isn't necessarily clear to me, the reasons for it, until it's done and I have time to sit with it. And so that screaming skull motif, because of our circumstance, we're kind of in lockdown. There's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety and a lot of really, really charged things happening all at once. And that motif really stuck with my work and has done so and continues to do so, 2+ years on. And and it really does still kind of hold that same symbolism of transformations. In the mask work, it kind of ended up sort of symbolizing almost like these sort of death masks, in a sense, this continuous sort of if for lack of a better word, these small deaths, just continuously sort of reimagining ourselves and myself, and where I'm at and how I'm responding, and in terms of time and energy and so on. The screaming skull sort of turned into these self-portraitures as well. And then they also turned into these flowers, and I sort of started calling them precious petals. And there was this sort of element of recognizing that sort of these waves that I'm going through, but then also with that time that is passing, knowing that that I am still here. I am changed and I'm different, and all these transformations and small deaths have occurred. But having that time and seeing that, it's like a little bit of tongue in cheek, the precious petals, I was able to see how in certain circumstances, these faces kind of also symbolize these huge dramas that have unfolded and whatnot, and having a little bit, I suppose, in this dark humor sort of embedded in all of that somehow, because knowing in terms of family history and in my personal experience, using humor has been a really helpful way in which to sort of carry on and carry through.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Really engaging answer. Thank you. I have a question for Elana. I'm wondering if we can pull up her work. Our work is never done. The image for that work. And I think I personally would love to hear more about how your work in the public realm informs your art practice, and vice versa, and how that sort of works together, especially, and I know you talked about it a little bit, but especially with this piece being such a great example of that duality.
Thank you for that. In my sort of parallel life that sometimes interacts with my art life, I do community organizing and activism. So right now I'm actually involved in a lawsuit with 65 other artists. We're all trying to get our artwork back from this entity that has our artwork. So right now I'm really focused on that and organizing that. And I have also been involved in like local community organizing in my hometown, and other organizing and activist movements, and that's just been something that provides my life a lot of meaning. And then there's always this overlap that happens with the artwork where, for example, like I made these two rattles. I have a very quiet voice, and so I made these two protest rattles just to bring with me when I went to demonstrations, because I often get hoarse and I just have a hard time projecting my voice. And anyway, so I brought them. One of them said no, one of them said yes. They're like ceramic, and then just bringing them into that space and using them, I realized, oh, wow, these are actually something, like they're not just personal instruments for me when I go out into the street, but they actually, there's more to it there. There's more to explore. And so I now have made over 60 rattles, and it's an ongoing series. In my art practice, I've also shown at galleries and used in performances and stuff. So yeah, there's like a dialogue back and forth, and sometimes things remain in one realm or another. This sculpture, for example, our work is never done unfinished business. I made it thinking that I was going to work with the Los Angeles Poverty Department and Street Symphony, and the Urban Voices Project. And I was really conceiving of this sculpture like for those organizations that all work with people that live in Skid Row and in that area, and they work around advocacy around homelessness, houselessness, and housing rights. And so I had made this sculpture to use in this festival that they have every 2 years, and had been working with them for like a year and a half. And you know, it obviously didn't happen, but maybe someday.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I just want to read, we have a couple of great comments. So we have a shout out from Bob Milling. Thank you to Angels Gate, to all the artists, and of course, Stephanie Sherwood for such a great show. And Bob lives only a couple of blocks away, so I assume you've seen the show. Come back and see it again. We also have a comment/question from Ann Weber. She's one of our studio artists here at Angels Gate. Congratulations, Stephanie, on being selected to curate a show at Angels Gate, and thank you for bringing this show to San Pedro. And Stephanie, if you could please talk about how you found these artists and why you put them together and what drew you to their work.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for coming to the talk. I'm just endlessly excited to have been able to do this. And it's it's hard to describe what drew me to all of these works. I think it's a very kind of intuitive gut thing. I mean, I know like several of the works of these artists, the works of these artists I had seen in person before. And that's always like, I'm just a very like tactile, like I love tactile works, and I love color. Like Alicia had mentioned, I have this thing for neon. I really do. It's hard to explain because I've never been a very like systematic person in terms of how I work. It's a little bit more intuitive, but I found them all in totally different ways, some in person, some at seeing their work at galleries, and then some just seeing them on social media and coming across them on social media, which is our other, major way to like connect with one another these days. But I would say why I put them together, whenever I build a show in my head, I'm usually really trying to kind of pull, like kind of find artists from like totally different communities. You know, that's always like really important to me, that like instead of artists or artworks that have been shown together before, or like they know each other, they went to school together, all of that kind of stuff. Like I like to have it like they're completely totally different. They're in different cities, they're in different communities, they're in different, you know, little social realms and all of that to bring together, because that's the most exciting part for me is those new connections, you know, between the artists and between the works, you know. And this is, you know, due to COVID, this is the first time we've been able to really come together. And although it's not in person, I'm just excited to see all your faces in tiny squares and get to have this conversation together, because yeah, love all y'alls.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Stephanie, for bringing this great group of artists. There will be an auxiliary exhibition opening soon, so I'm going to share those that image. And Stephanie, if you want to tell us all a little bit about this event coming up.
Yeah, of course. Oh, yes. Okay, so on March 12th, very excited to be able to present the work of Adam Rabinowitz at Crafted at the Port of Los Angeles. Since the port is such an important, you know, thematic element for this exhibition, it was really exciting for me to be able to use the port as an auxiliary location for a work that would be in conjunction with all the other amazing artists we've heard from today. So this piece is a video work entitled Death of a Planet, and it will be a projected video work in the port. Very excited to share that with you all. So save the date, come hang out with us in person, outdoors safely.
Thank you. Yes, that will be a free event, and you're more than welcome to come. It's right by Brewery West, so you can watch the video, support local businesses in the port in San Pedro, and it's also Crafted, which is a maker space which features lots of artists from the area who sell as part of their business. I know we didn't have a chance to ask everyone a question because we're out of time. This was a really fantastic conversation, and I can't end this without first thanking all of the people who made this show happen behind the scenes. So there were quite a few people at Angels Gate who helped make this happen, from our prep team to our graphic design, our PR, our executive director, Amy Erickson. The virtual tour was made by Perry Okamoto, the photos by Justin Gallagher. And if you haven't seen, there's a sneak peek of a video that will feature artist interviews by LA Art Documents that is on our Instagrams. So make sure you follow all of us, Angels Gate Art Gallery, and then that'll link you to all these fantastic artists. And then I also can't end this without sort of showing some additional events coming up. So from current slide, there we go. So we have 2 more related events. So kind of playing off of this show, we have an event on March 7th, Exploring Your Subconscious Portal. It's an introduction to hypnosis. With a guest instructor, Diana Seva. And then we also have a separate event as part of our Artists at Work, Artists in Residence program, Midweek Feast with Nancy Wu on Wednesday, March 2nd. And all of those events you can find online on our website at angelsgateart.org. I want to give a huge thank you to Stephanie Sherwood and all of the artists who were great to work with, and it's so great to have your work at the gallery. The gallery is open Thursdays through Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. You don't need an appointment, but we do have some COVID protocols. and all of that can be found online. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. If the artists could stay on with me, but thank you so much for supporting Angels Gate and coming to this event. So thank you and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.